The girl on the auction block couldn't have been more than 12, maybe younger, though the shadows carved into her face spoke of years no child should ever carry. Her dress was a faded pale blue, the hem frayed and dust-streaked, like something her mother had once stitched from scraps and love. She clutched a torn piece of fabric in one hand, calico, blood-stained, and looked out at the silent crowd with eyes too green, too knowing. "Please don't sell me like Mama," she whispered. Her voice cracked, dry and raw from crying, but the words still cut through the hot, dry air of Perdition Creek like a bullet through glass. The townspeople fidgeted. Boots scraped dirt. A few coughed. One man in the back laughed, nervous, uncomfortable. Sheriff Vernon Pike, standing tall beside the auctioneer, cleared his throat and gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Now, Temperance, it's just procedure. The town's got to settle your mama's debts. Ain't no shame in it. She's been orphaned 2 weeks, the auctioneer offered. Starting bid is $50. Someone near the front whistled low. $50, the price of a mule, the worth of a child. A murmur swept through the crowd. Most of them weren't there to bid. They were there to watch. And that's when he appeared. Boot steps echoed off the dry wood of the boardwalk, slow and deliberate. From the northern edge of town, where the dust met pine, a shadow peeled away from the morning light. He was massive. A brown cowboy hat shaded his face, worn low over eyes that didn't blink. His shoulders were wide enough to fill a door frame, arms thick like railroad ties. A brown leather vest stretched over a faded shirt. His boots were scarred with age and use. His face carried the kind of silence you didn't interrupt. Wind-beaten, bearded, a single white scar running down his left cheek, like it had been carved by lightning. Nobody spoke as he moved forward. Nobody dared. He stopped in front of the block, looked up at the girl and said simply, "She's mine." Temperance blinked, startled. The crowd held its breath. Sheriff Pike squinted. "Nathaniel Cross?" he asked, almost a growl. "Well, I'll be. Thought you were dead up in those mountains. Ain't seen you in, 15 years? Nathaniel's eyes didn't leave the girl. "She's mine," he said again. "She's my daughter." "That's so?" Pike shifted his weight, rested a hand on the butt of his revolver. "Because unless you got papers to prove it, marriage certificate, birth record, anything legal, this here's town business." Nathaniel's voice didn't rise. He didn't move, but something in the way he stood changed the air. "I don't need papers to know my own blood," he said. At the back of the crowd, Judge Cornelius Ashburn leaned on his silver-headed cane, squinting through the glare. His suit was too fine for this place, his skin too soft. He watched Nathaniel with the slow, calculating stare of a snake in sunlight. Temperance stared down at the stranger. Her lips trembled. "I don't know you," she said softly. Nathaniel finally looked up at her, and for a moment something flickered behind his eyes. Regret, maybe, or memory. "Your mama's name was Rebecca," he said. "Rebecca Whitfield. She wore a blue ribbon in her hair and sang when she chopped firewood. You were born in March, a week early during a snowstorm. You had a birthmark on your left ankle shaped like a crescent moon." Temperance's mouth opened slightly. She looked down at her boot, then back up at him. "That true, child?" someone in the crowd asked. Temperance gave a tiny nod. The sheriff looked uneasy now. "Even so," he muttered. "Even if she is yours, there's still the matter of the debt." Judge Ashburn's got record that Rebecca owed $200 to the boarding house, the doctor, and the dry goods store. The girl's auction covers that Nathaniel reached into his coat. The leather pouch he pulled out hit the platform with a weight that silenced everything. He untied the cord. Gold coins spilled onto the block, catching the morning sun. "200, Nathaniel said. "Count it if you like." Even the judge looked up at that. The auctioneer licked his lips. "Well, I suppose that settles the debt." "Not so fast," Judge Ashburn finally spoke, stepping forward. His voice was smooth, polished, like a preacher who never believed a word of his own sermons. "Guardianship requires more than money. The child must be raised under proper supervision, morality, education, structure. She'll have everything she needs," Nathaniel said. Ashburn smiled, but it was thin and ugly. "We'll be checking on that." Nathaniel turned to the girl. "Come on." Temperance looked from him to the gold, then down at the sheriff, the judge, the crowd. Her hands clutched tighter around the fabric in her palm, the torn piece of her mother's dress. Blood had dried along the edge. She stared at it for a moment, then stepped off the block. She followed him. They walked past the sheriff, past the townspeople, past Judge Ashburn. No one tried to stop them. Not yet. At the edge of the square, Temperance paused. She turned and looked back at the crowd. A breeze stirred her tangled hair, lifting the dust and memory of her mother's voice. Then she looked up at the man beside her, at the broad shadow he cast, the rifle slung across his back, the slow, steady breath he took like nothing in the world could shake him. She held up the cloth. "My mama's blood is on this," she said. He didn't answer. She squinted up at him, cautious, wondering. "Are you really my daddy?" Nathaniel didn't flinch, but for the first time, something broke in his voice when he said, "I am now." The road out of Perdition Creek narrowed fast, trading the wide dust of the town square for rough wagon ruts carved deep into the hills. Nathaniel led the way, the girl walking a few paces behind, her arms wrapped tight around herself like she was trying to hold her bones together. They didn't speak. He didn't ask if she was cold. She didn't ask where they were going. That silence stretched through the long climb, past a cluster of old sycamores and into a narrow gulch where the air turned sharper, colder. Late afternoon sun filtered through the trees like the light was tired. It was a land carved by wind and time, stubborn as the people who survived it. At the top of the ridge, his cabin came into view. 2 rooms, smoke curling faint from the chimney, a split rail fence half finished around the clearing. The kind of place no one found unless they knew where to look. The girl stared at it like it might disappear if she blinked. "This is it," Nathaniel said. Temperance hesitated at the edge of the clearing. "I thought you'd have animals or something." "A horse, maybe. I don't keep things that eat more than I do." She didn't laugh, just nodded as if she understood. And maybe she did. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. 1 bed, a stone hearth, a table with 2 chairs that didn't match. Hooks on the wall held tools, traps, a rifle with a worn leather sling. A hand-carved rocking chair sat in the corner, still like it had never been used. Nathaniel gestured toward the cot pushed against the far wall. "You can take that one. It's yours now." She stepped in, shoulders still rigid, glancing around like a deer in tall grass. Her fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, then fell to her side. He watched her, quietly, like he was trying to remember how to be around people again. "I don't bite," he said finally. Temperance didn't smile. "That's what he used to say, too." He froze. "Who?" "My mama's second husband." Mr. Morrison Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "He ever hurt you?" Her silence said enough. "You don't have to talk about it," he said gently. "I ain't afraid of talking," she replied. "I'm just tired of not being believed." He didn't press. He just turned back to the fire and tossed on another log. Sparks lifted toward the chimney, tiny stars burning out before they reached the sky. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said after a while. "You'll eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, and you don't answer to anyone but yourself while you're here." "That what a daddy's supposed to say?" "No," he admitted. "That's what a decent man should have said a long time ago." That night, she didn't sleep much. Neither did he. She tossed on the cot, clutching that blood-stained fabric in her fist. Nathaniel lay on the floor with a blanket rolled under his head, eyes half open, listening to the sounds she made, the whimpers she tried to swallow, the creak of old floorboards as she sat up now and then, restless like a hunted animal. At dawn, he made coffee and left a mug on the table beside a tin plate of dried venison and biscuit. When she finally slid into the chair, he was out back, chopping wood. The axe bit deep with every swing. She watched from the doorway for a long time before stepping out barefoot. "You always live like this?" she asked. "Like what?" "Like the world's a war still happening." Nathaniel set the axe down and looked at her. "It is." She didn't argue. Later, he showed her how to clean fish, how to set a snare, how to tell coyote tracks from dog. She didn't ask why she needed to know. She just learned, quietly, quickly, like her life depended on it. It probably had. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge and cast the world in deep gold, Temperance sat near the fire with her knees drawn to her chest. "Did you know my mama?" she asked, eyes on the flames. Nathaniel was at the table, running oil over the stock of his Winchester. He paused, not looking up. "Once," he said. "A long time ago, before the war. She said my daddy died." "I did," he said quietly. "Just not all the way." Temperance looked at him now. Really looked. "She was good," she said. "My mama. She used to sing when we had eggs in the pan. Even when things were bad, she'd sing." Nathaniel nodded. "She had secrets," Temperance continued. "Folks said she was crazy near the end, talking about papers and letters and people watching her. But I know what I saw." Nathaniel set the rifle down. "What did you see?" "She was scared. Not of dying, of what would happen to me if the wrong folks found me. Said they'd try to take something she was protecting." Nathaniel's brow furrowed. "You mean money? Land?" "I don't know," she said. "But the night before she died, she told me to keep something safe. Told me never to show it unless I found a man named Nathaniel Cross." His heart thudded once, loud and thick. She reached into her bodice, pulled something wrapped in cloth, and held it out. A small brass key. Worn, old, a number etched into the side. Nathaniel took it with hands that didn't quite shake. "You think it's important?" she asked. "I think it's the reason your mama's dead." Temperance looked at the key, then at him. "They killed her for this?" "They might have, but they said she died of fever." He looked into her eyes. "People in power can buy whatever truth they want." A long silence followed. Then she said, "You gonna keep me safe?" Nathaniel stood and crossed to the fire. He tossed another log on, slow and deliberate. "I can't promise that," he said, "but I'll sure as hell try." She didn't reply, just nodded like she understood something heavier than any child should have to carry. Outside, a hawk called high over the trees. Inside, the fire cracked and popped. Temperance leaned back against the chair and stared into the flames. "They'll come for it, won't they?" "They will. And they'll come for me." Nathaniel's hand tightened around the key. "They'll try." Her voice was smaller now. "Then maybe it's time I learned how to shoot." He looked over at her, 12 years old and already made of scars. "We'll start in the morning," he said. But what he didn't tell her, not yet, was that someone already had come, and not just anyone. Just before dusk, high on the ridge behind the cabin, he'd seen the flicker of glass. A scope. Watching. He hadn't told Temperance. Not yet. Because whoever was out there already knew they'd found more than just a scared little girl. They'd found a man willing to fight, and if he had to, Nathaniel Cross would burn the world down to keep her breathing. Morning broke cold and silver over the cabin, a thin mist rising from the creek beyond the trees. Nathaniel sat at the table with his coffee gone cold, staring at the doorway. He could hear Temperance moving softly in the other room, her bare feet whispering against the plank floor. The world outside felt too quiet, like a wolf holding its breath. She came out, holding a folded envelope. The paper was worn, creased from being hidden, but the handwriting across the front was still sharp. She held it to her chest like a talisman. "I wasn't going to show you," she said. "Mama said not until I was sure." Nathaniel turned slowly. "What is it?" "A letter from her." "For you," he stood without meaning to. The chair scraped back. "For me?" She nodded, stepping closer. "You're Nathaniel Cross, ain't you?" "Mama called you Nate in her sleep." He reached for the envelope but stopped himself, his hand hovering. "How did you get that?" "She gave it to me the night before she died. Said if the world went wrong, I should find a man named Nathaniel Cross and hand him this." She set it on the table. His name was there, clear as sunrise in Rebecca's hand. He picked it up with fingers that had held rifles, swung axes, killed men, but never trembled like this. He slid a thumb under the seal and opened it. The paper inside smelled faintly of wood smoke and lavender. He unfolded it once, twice, and began to read. "My dearest Nate, if you are reading this, then either you have found your way back to us, or I am gone. You left a piece of yourself on the battlefield, but you left more here, in this cabin, in this child. Our child. She was born March 15th during a snowstorm. You would have loved her fierce cry. I named her Temperance because I wanted her to grow strong but kind, a balance you always carried. They will come for me, Nate. They already are. There are things I've seen in Judge Ashburn's ledgers, things that would burn this territory if the truth came out. I've hidden proof, but it is not enough. If they take me, promise me you will take her. She's all that's good in me. Yours forever, Rebecca." Nathaniel's vision blurred. He set the letter down, pressing his palm flat against the words. For years he'd told himself she'd remarried, that she'd moved on, that his death on paper had freed her. He'd built a life of silence around that lie. And now it lay cracked open like a dry creek bed after a storm. He turned to the girl. "Your birthday's March 15th? She nodded slowly. "Mama made me a pie every year, even when we had nothing but flour." "She called you Temperance?" "Yeah." He swallowed hard. "You're mine." Her face shifted like a wall had fallen, but she didn't know whether to step through. "You sure?" He picked up the letter again. "This says I am. This says you're my blood." She stared at him for a long time. "Then why didn't you come back?" He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Because the man I was when I left couldn't come home. He died out there. I didn't think there was anything left for you but shame." "That's not what Mama said." Her voice was soft but steady. "She said you went to war because you believed good could still win." Nathaniel looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a child, but the woman she might become if he failed her. He rubbed a hand over his face and sat heavily. "There's more," she whispered. "Mama said people wanted something she had. Papers, names. She hid 'em. Said Judge Ashburn wasn't the man folks thought." "I believe her," Nathaniel said. "She told me to keep this safe too." Temperance reached into her pocket and pulled out the small brass key again, placing it next to the letter. "Said it opens a box at the bank in Denver." Nathaniel stared at the key, then at the letter. His mind raced. He'd fought men like Ashburn before. Men who wore the law like armor while they stole the land under your feet. They'd killed for less than what Rebecca might have hidden. Temperance's voice broke through his thoughts. "They'll come here, won't they?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. They already know who you are." "Probably." She sat down across from him. "Then you best figure what you're going to do." Outside, a jay screamed in the trees. The wind shifted. Nathaniel glanced toward the window and saw a glint between the pines. Not sunlight, but glass. A scope, catching the dawn. He rose from the table and crossed to the wall where his Winchester hung. He lifted it down, feeling the weight like an old friend, his thumb brushing the worn checkering of the stock. Behind him, Temperance asked, "What is it?" Nathaniel looked out the window, eyes narrowing. "Looks like I need to remember how to shoot again." They left just after first light, before the frost on the porch boards had time to melt. Nathaniel saddled the old mule he'd kept tethered in the tree line, a creature too stubborn to die and too smart to bray. He packed light, a blanket, a tin of jerky, a flint, a canteen, and his Winchester. Temperance clung to a small burlap satchel, her boots too big and her eyes wide. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "High ground," he said. "There's a place up the ridge. Hard to find. Harder to get out of." She didn't ask more, just nodded and followed. By mid-morning, the wind shifted. Nathaniel stopped cold as they crested a slope of pine and shale. 3 horse tracks, fresh, heading straight for the cabin they'd just left. He crouched low and touched the tracks, his eyes narrowing. "They've been here maybe half an hour," he said. "Who?" Temperance asked. "Men with hard eyes and soft morals," he said. "Bounty hunters. Ashburn's kind. Will they kill us? They're not paid to take us alive." He stood, tightening the strap across his chest, and scanned the slope above. The trail they'd taken was no longer safe. "We cut north," he said. "There's a stone cabin my father built when I was a boy, half buried in the cliffside. Nobody but me and the hawks know it's there." Temperance didn't argue. She followed him through the underbrush, stumbling over roots, her breath coming in sharp bursts. The air got thinner as they climbed, and the pines thinned into scrub. Far below, a hawk screeched once, and Nathaniel paused. 3 dark shapes had just broken out of the trees. Riders, fast, closing the gap. They pushed hard for the next 2 hours, the sun climbing to noon and heat bouncing off the rocks. Temperance's lips were cracked, her arms scraped, but she kept going. When they reached the sheer wall of the cliff, she gasped. "There's nothing here," she said. Nathaniel didn't answer. He moved along the stone face until he found a narrow crevice almost invisible to the eye. He slid through sideways, and after a moment, she followed. Inside, the air was cool and still. The stone cabin opened like a mouth in the mountain. Crude, small, built with flat rock and mud mortar. A fire pit in the center. A single window carved into the stone like an eye slit. He dropped his gear and turned to her. "We stay here tonight." She collapsed onto the ground, breathing hard. "They gonna find us?" He sat beside her. "Not if they don't know where to look. And not if we don't make a sound." That night, after a small fire and a strip of dried meat, they sat in silence as wind howled outside like wolves, remembering their ancestors. The stars were sharp through the window slit. Nathaniel broke the silence first. "Your mother ever mention what was in that box?" Temperance looked into the fire. Her face was pale in the flickering light. "She said it could ruin men." "You mean Judge Ashburn?" She said his hands were dirtier than the river after flood season. That he owned everything, the courthouse, the bank, half the land in the county. But it wasn't his name on the papers. Nathaniel leaned forward. "Whose was it?" Temperance shrugged. "I don't know. But she kept talking about numbers. Ledger numbers. She said if anything happened to her, I was to find you and give you the key." She pulled the satchel into her lap and ran her fingers along the edge, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up, her voice low. "You believe she died of sickness?" Nathaniel's eyes didn't move from hers. "No." Temperance nodded. "I heard 'em. That night. Men outside. She made me hide in the chimney crawl. I could hear her begging. I think they were asking where the key was." Nathaniel's stomach turned. "She screamed once," Temperance said. "Then nothing. When I crawled out, she was cold. They'd set the place on fire. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The fire popped. I don't know why they didn't check the chimney, she added. Maybe they thought she was alone. You're lucky they didn't. No, she said. I'm just forgotten. Nathaniel stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the cabin, staring out into the night. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was loved, that she had him now, but he didn't believe in saying things unless he could back them with action. After a long silence, he turned. Let me see the key again. She hesitated, then reached inside the neckline of her shirt and pulled it out. It hung on a thin cord around her neck, dulled with age but unmistakable. Brass, small, stamped with the number 317. Nathaniel stepped closer, taking it gently in his hand. This is a safety deposit key, he murmured. Denver Bank, if I'm guessing right. She nodded. Mama used to say, when you hold that key, you're holding more than a secret. You're holding a loaded gun. Nathaniel stared at it for a long moment, then let the key drop back against her chest. We can't stay here long, he said. We'll rest tonight. Tomorrow, we find a horse and get to Haven. What's Haven? He looked at her, eyes dark. A place for people like us, the kind nobody's supposed to remember. Just then, a pebble rolled down the slope outside, soft but sharp. Temperance stiffened. Nathaniel crossed the floor in one stride, pulled the rifle from his pack, and flattened against the wall. Through the slit window, the moon caught movement, a shadow too still, too intentional. He thumbed the rifle's hammer back. Temperance whispered, Is it them? He gave one nod. One, maybe more. Watching. She clutched the key tightly in her fist, knuckles white. Nathaniel didn't move from the window. I need you to be ready, he said. I am, she whispered. And with that, she slipped the cord back around her neck, tucking the key into her shirt, the same way her mother had taught her. Nathaniel breathed deep, slow, steady. Whatever Ashburn wanted, it was worth blood. And now, blood was what he was going to get. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge when they broke camp. Nathaniel led Temperance through the pines in silence, his rifle slung low, his eyes scanning every break in the trees. Behind them, the stone shelter blended back into the mountain like a memory. Ahead, the trail to Haven was more a whisper in the earth than a path. He hadn't walked it in years. Temperance trudged behind, her steps quieter than most grown men's. The key around her neck tapped softly against her collarbone. What is Haven? She asked. It's a place for those with nowhere else, he said. Widows. Runaways. Drunks who got sober and men who couldn't. I found it after the war. Is it safe? It's as close to safe as this world gets. They traveled until dusk. The air grew damper, the ground softer. The trees closed in. Then, in a clearing too small for a town but too well built for a camp, a row of cabins came into view. Fences patched with scrap wood. Gardens growing between stumps. Smoke rose from one chimney. 3 men stepped from the shadows, all of them armed, all of them scarred. One, an older black man with a limp and a feather hanging from his hat, stepped forward. Nate Cross, he said, almost smiling. Didn't think I'd see your shadow again. Elias, Nathaniel nodded. You're still breathing. That's a good start. Barely, Elias replied, eyeing the girl. Who's the tag-along? My daughter, Nathaniel said without pause. Temperance. Elias blinked, surprise flickering across his face. Didn't know you had one. I didn't either. Not till last week. That was all the explanation Elias needed. He waved them forward. Come in then. Let's get you out of sight before the wrong eyes catch a glimpse. Inside one of the larger cabins, they were met by a half-dozen others. A Cherokee woman named Maddie with storm-gray braids and eyes to match. 2 Mexican brothers who barely spoke, and a preacher named Amos who'd once set fire to his own church in protest of a railroad buyout. Nathaniel gave them the short version: the girl, the judge, the bounty hunters. They listened. Haven had always listened. Maddie handed Temperance a bowl of stew and laid a worn quilt across her lap. "Your mama's name was Rebecca?" she asked softly. Temperance nodded. "Rebecca Whitfield." At that, silence fell like a dropped anvil. Maddie stood and went to a chest in the corner. She pulled out a leather-bound book and laid it on the table between them. "Your mama came here once," Maddie said. 3 winters ago. Said she was part of something bigger than herself, a network of women and widows, all trying to take down Ashburn from the inside. Temperance's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "My mama! She wasn't just running, child," Maddie said. "She was gathering. Letters, receipts, land deeds, names. Ashburn thinks he owns this territory, but your mama had his secrets tucked in pockets he couldn't find." Nathaniel leaned forward. "Are they still here?" "No," Elias said, "but copies are." She knew they'd come for her eventually. He left the room and returned with a stack of papers tied in rawhide. He laid them out slowly, page after page of ledgers, receipts, and letters. Stamped seals, dated deeds, and then, at the very bottom, a signed confession. Nathaniel picked it up, squinting at the faded ink. "Ashburn's handwriting," he murmured. "Says he authorized the removal of certain settlers from disputed lands, including forced relocation and death." Temperance's breath caught. "He killed people." "No," Nathaniel said, cold rising in his chest. "He had them killed." "Why?" "For land," Maddie answered. "For gold." For silence, Temperance set her bowl aside. Her small hands shook as she touched the edge of the confession. "My mama died for this." "She died protecting it," Elias said. "She died protecting you." Nathaniel stood, pacing. "We can't sit on this. We get this to the circuit judge in Denver. The federal marshals will bury Ashburn alive." "Then you'd best move quick," Maddie said. "Ashburn's got eyes even in Denver. But there's one man you can trust. Judge Roy Kellum. He's old law. Clean." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "Then that's where we'll go." Temperance looked up at him. "We? You mean you're coming?" He looked at her like it was the dumbest question he'd ever heard. "I said you were mine." "That hasn't changed." She swallowed hard. "Not used to people staying." "Well," he said, pulling her quilt tighter around her shoulders. "Get used to it." Just then, the door creaked open and an old woman stepped inside. She walked with a cane carved from bone and willow. She wore a dusty black shawl and didn't speak. In her hands, she held a large leather folio. Nathaniel straightened. "What's that?" The old woman looked at Temperance. "Your mama left this with me," she said. "Said if anything ever happened, it was to go to her daughter." She laid it on the table and stepped back. Nathaniel untied the string. Inside was a set of organized papers, everything Rebecca had ever collected. Bribes, maps, land grabs, a list of names. And then, tucked in the back, a letter addressed to whom it may concern. He unfolded it. It was a sworn statement, signed and notarized, confessing to Judge Ashburn's direct role in the murder of 3 settler families in White Hollow Canyon. Temperance stared at the signature. "That's him," she whispered. "That's his name." Nathaniel exhaled slow. They weren't running anymore. Now they were coming for him. The rain came heavy that night, sweeping down the mountain like a warning. It drummed against the roofs of Haven, carving little rivers in the mud. Nathaniel stood under the eave of Elias's cabin, his hat pulled low, his jaw clenched tight. They couldn't run anymore. The folder Rebecca had left behind was more than enough to bury Ashburn in a courtroom, but only if it got there. And Ashburn wouldn't let that happen. Not quietly, not legally, not at all. Elias came to stand beside him, arms crossed. "You got that look again." "What look's that?" "Same one you had when you burned the bridge at Broken Ridge." "Means blood's about to spill." Nathaniel glanced sideways. "You in?" Elias gave a soft chuckle. "Reckon I always was." By morning, the whole of Haven was awake and gathered around the long table inside the meeting cabin. It smelled of damp earth, coffee, and gun oil. Maddie had laid the papers out like sacred scripture. The men and women of Haven survivors, outlaws, widows, misfits, looked to Nathaniel like they'd never looked at anyone else. "Here's what we know," Nathaniel said. "Ashburn's got 3 things on his side: money men and the sheriff's office. He's using bounty hunters to do his dirty work, and he's bribed half the circuit judges from here to Denver." Maddie added, "He's expecting us to run, so that's what we let him think we're doing." Nathaniel picked up a piece of charcoal and began to draw in the dust on the table. "We split 3 ways," he said. "First group stays here, sets fires, makes noise, makes them think we're still hiding in the hills. Second group hits his supply lines, intercepts riders, burns freight wagons, cuts off communication." He paused, then circled a spot on the crude map. "Third group heads straight into Perdition Creek." Gasps and murmurs stirred. Someone at the back muttered, "That town'll hang us on sight." "We're not going in guns blazing," Nathaniel said. "We're going in with proof. With documents, with Rebecca's file. We take it to the one man Ashburn can't buy, Judge Roy Kellum. He's due in town for the quarterly hearings." "You think the judge will believe us?" Maddie asked. "He won't have a choice once he sees what we got." Someone cleared their throat. It was Temperance. She stepped forward, clutching the bundle of papers she hadn't let go of since last night. "You'll need this," she said, handing it to him. "And I'm coming with you." Nathaniel stared at her. "No, you're not." Her chin lifted. "Mama died for the truth. I won't hide from it. You're a child." "She wasn't when she died," Temperance said, "and I stopped being a child that night too." The room went still. Her voice didn't tremble. "I know the names," she added. "I heard 'em when they came to our door. I know what the papers mean. I can swear to it." Elias looked at Nathaniel. "She's got fire. She's got a target on her back. All the more reason to keep her close." Nathaniel sighed, rubbed his hands down his face. "If anything happens to you—" "It already did," she said. "This is what's left of me." He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Not out of agreement, but out of understanding. He'd seen the look before, in soldiers who had nothing left to lose but their voice. "You ride with me," he said. "No side missions, no heroics. We go in, we hand the papers over, and we get out." She nodded. "Yes, sir." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Elias packed satchels with jerky, dried beans, and salt. Maddie sealed the letters in wax and tied them in oilskin. Temperance practiced reciting names and details while riding bareback around the perimeter, Nathaniel keeping pace beside her, silent but always near. That night, he sat with her outside their tent, the firelight flickering across her cheeks. She held the brass key between her fingers. "You scared?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Yes." "Good. Means you're still sane." She gave a small smile. "Were you scared in the war?" "All the time." "Then why'd you fight?" "Because I couldn't stand by and watch worse men win." She looked down at the key, then at him. "That's what Mama used to say." The next morning they rode out before dawn, Nathaniel in front, Temperance behind him on the mule, clutching the file like it was part of her body. Below them, Perdition Creek was waking up. Smoke curled from chimneys. Church bells echoed across the canyon. Somewhere down there, Judge Kellum was sharpening his pencil, and Ashburn was likely sharpening his knives. Nathaniel adjusted his hat. "All right, kid," he said. "Let's go remind him what justice looks like." Perdition Creek looked calm from the ridgeline whitewashed storefronts, horses tethered, a pair of boys tossing stones by the well. But Nathaniel saw through the quiet. He knew the feel of a town held hostage. The tension ran beneath the surface like a cracked bone under skin. They'd arrived just before noon, a market day. That was the point. Nathaniel dismounted behind the livery stable while Elias and the others scattered through alleyways and rooflines, taking their positions like threads weaving a trap. Temperance slipped off the mule and tucked her braid into her hat. The file was tucked beneath her coat, tied tight to her middle. "You know what you have to do?" Nathaniel asked. She nodded. "Find the families. Get them out. If things go wrong, they won't." He studied her for a beat longer, then handed her a slingshot and 3 smooth stones. It wasn't much, but it was something. She tucked it into her pocket, gave him one last look, and disappeared down the alley. Nathaniel turned toward the courthouse. The structure loomed over the center of town, its red brick facade rising above the saloon and general store. Inside those walls were records deeds, birth certificates, legal proceedings, and the judge's private chambers where the real evidence might be hidden. Elias and Maddie had secured the back entrance. 2 men in deputy coats stood out front, but they didn't see the shadows flanking them from the side alley. A sharp whistle cut through the wind. That was the signal. Nathaniel moved fast, a blur of motion as he crossed the street, shoulder low. The first guard never saw the butt of Elias's shotgun coming. The second reached for his revolver, but Maddie kicked his knees out before he could draw. The doors flew open. Nathaniel entered the courthouse, gun drawn. The lobby was empty, echoing with the sound of boots and breath. "Records rooms to the left," Elias muttered. Nathaniel nodded. "Secure it. Copy everything tied to Ashburn's holdings. We don't leave without the confession or the ledgers." While the others spread out, Nathaniel moved toward the judge's private office. He picked the lock with a thin knife and slipped inside. Dust floated in slanted light. The room smelled of pipe smoke and mold. Behind the desk, a cabinet sat locked with a steel latch. Nathaniel pried it open. Inside, stacked neatly, were folders labeled with names, some he recognized from Haven. Names of people who'd vanished, settlers who'd lost land, witnesses who'd died in accidents. He swept it all into a burlap sack. Outside, shouts rang out. Gunfire. Nathaniel spun around and ran to the front window. Across the square, the saloon doors burst open. Men with rifles spilled out, shouting orders. Lancers, Ashburn's hired guns. He bolted out the door, rifle in hand. Meanwhile, behind the church, Temperance crept through the back alleys, ducking beneath windows and peeking through cracks. She found the first house-boarded windows, guards out front. Inside, she knew, were the Calloways, a family of 4, threatened into silence. She picked up a rock and threw it hard at the far corner of the house. When the guards turned, she darted in through the kitchen door. "Calloways!" she hissed. A woman gasped. "Don't scream." "I'm here to help." The man of the house stepped into view, gaunt and limping. His wife clutched their baby. Temperance showed them the file. "My name's Temperance. Rebecca Whitfield was my mother. She died for this. We're going to court." The man blinked, then nodded slowly. "We'll follow. 2 more houses, 2 more families." One man tried to refuse. "They'll kill us," he said. "They're killing us anyway," she shot back. "This time, we speak." Back in the town square, the gunfire intensified. Smoke curled from the general store, and the church bell rang wildly as if sounding an alarm. Nathaniel crouched behind a wagon, exchanging fire with a sharpshooter on the roof. One of the Haven men went down, chest hit. From the courthouse steps, Maddie raised a white flag, the signal that they'd secured the evidence. Then the town quieted. For a moment, only the wind moved, tossing dust and ash. And then he came. Judge Ashburn stepped into view, flanked by 2 hired guns. His long coat flapped like a flag of arrogance. He looked older than Nathaniel remembered, but meaner, too. He smiled like a wolf. "Well, if it isn't Nathaniel Cross," he drawled. "Came back to die on familiar dirt?" Nathaniel stepped out, rifle still raised. "You know why I'm here?" Ashburn snorted. "You think that pile of paper means anything? I own this town, every piece of it, not anymore." From behind the church, a group emerged. Families, women, children, men too scared to speak before. And leading them was Temperance. She walked calmly, her chin up, eyes locked on Ashburn, the folder clutched in her arms. Behind her, the Calloways, the Ortiz boys, the widow McGree. The people had found their voices. Ashburn's smile cracked. "I remember you," he said. "The little brat from the cabin." Temperance didn't blink. "You killed my mother," she said, voice rising clear across the square. "And I'll say it in court." The courtyard held its breath. Temperance stood tall in the dusty square, arms trembling as she clutched the sealed folder of evidence against her chest. Behind her, the townsfolk who had lived in fear now looked to her with a weight of hope. The courthouse loomed behind them all, sunlight hitting its bricks like judgment itself. Judge Ashburn didn't flinch. His lips curled into a sneer as if her words were nothing more than a child's tantrum. His fingers twitched. "You've said enough, girl." Nathaniel knew that tone. He saw Ashburn's right hand drift toward the revolver at his hip, and he moved, but not fast enough. Ashburn's Colt cleared leather with a flash of silver. The report of the shot cracked through the square like thunder. Temperance jerked backward as the bullet struck her shoulder, the folder tumbling from her hands and scattering papers across the dirt. Before the echo died, Nathaniel's rifle barked. Ashburn staggered, the impact slamming into his chest just left of center. He dropped to his knees, disbelief etched across his face like a man who'd never thought justice applied to him. He fell forward into the dirt, blood soaking through the front of his vest. Silence fell again. Then chaos. Temperance crumpled to the ground, clutching her shoulder. Nathaniel ran, faster than he thought his legs could carry him, dropping to his knees beside her. "I'm okay," she gasped through clenched teeth. "Just burns." "It burns." He pressed a handkerchief to the wound, eyes wide with fear that refused to show in his voice. "You're not dying, not today." Around them, the townspeople moved in like a tide. Mahdi and Elias secured Ashburn's men, who were too stunned or too smart to keep fighting after their employer bled out in the dust. Elias retrieved the scattered documents, collecting the proof like fallen feathers. He handed them to a man in a tan coat bearing the seal of the United States government. The federal agent had arrived quietly, unnoticed in the crowd as he often did. His name was Deputy Marshal Charles Heath. No one had known for sure if he would come. Nathaniel hadn't dared to hope. But now Heath stood over the fallen judge, flipping through the blood-splattered documents. "These are official," he said grimly. "Ledgers, letters. Hell, there's even a confession in here." He looked around. "Where's the girl?" Nathaniel was still cradling her, rocking gently on the steps of the courthouse. Her face was pale, damp with tears, but her eyes were steady. "She's right here," he said. "She'll need to testify," the marshal said. "If she's up for it." Temperance looked up from Nathaniel's arms, her mouth a thin line of pain and determination. "I'll say every word." Heath gave a nod of respect. "She's got grit." "Runs in the family," Nathaniel muttered. The square had changed. Ashburn's men were being disarmed. Doors opened. Women emerged, wide-eyed and silent. The preacher rang the church bell, not in alarm but in reckoning. Temperance sat up slowly, wincing. Nathaniel helped her shift, his arm never leaving her back. The light was golden now, long and low, and the whole town seemed washed in the color of endings, or maybe beginnings. Temperance looked at the children gathering near the well, the old men sitting on the steps of the saloon, and the families unchaining their own front gates. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "Can we stay now, Papa?" Spring came early to Perdition Creek that year, and with it, something the town hadn't known in a long time. Peace. It started with the clang of chains falling from the jailhouse doors. The first morning after Ashburn's death, the federal marshal posted the new orders. Land seized under false pretenses would be returned. Ashburn's deputies were marched out of town in irons. Those who resisted faced trial in Denver. A few had vanished into the hills, but the community kept watch now, rifles over mantels and eyes at every window. The courthouse, once a symbol of fear, became something else entirely. By the end of the month, its oak benches were rearranged into rows of small desks. The judge's pulpit became a blackboard, and every morning as the sun poured in through the tall windows, children lined up to enter, barefoot, gap-toothed, smiling. Temperance stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, guiding their hands as they formed letters. She could barely believe it sometimes. Miss Temperance Cross, the schoolmarm. She wasn't much older than her oldest student, but no one seemed to mind. They respected her, maybe because they knew she'd faced something most of them had only whispered about. And in the afternoons, when the bell rang and the kids scattered toward home, Temperance walked across the square to the little carpenter's shed beside the old jail. That's where she found Nathaniel. He was usually covered in sawdust, a thin pencil behind one ear, squinting down at a carved block of pine. Today, it was a rocking horse. Yesterday, it had been a set of marbles for the Cooper twins. He didn't say much, never had. But he listened, and slowly, carefully, he learned how to be someone's father. They shared a small house now, one of the miners' cabins up the ridge, patched with new timber and wildflowers in the windowsill. There was a vegetable garden out back, 2 hens, and a dog they hadn't meant to keep but couldn't let go. In town, folks started calling him Mr. Cross. Some still whispered when they saw him coming about the rifle that never left his side, about the things he'd done in the war or to Ashburn. But more often than not, those whispers came with nods of respect. A tipped hat, a smile from the blacksmith, a pie left on the stoop. Elias stayed close for a while, helping with repairs and hauling stone for the new well. Maddie took over the general store, and the two of them seemed to bicker a little more than necessary, which usually meant something was blooming. Every Sunday, the town gathered in the open square. Not for sermons, they'd seen enough of men who preached without kindness, but for stories, news, songs. There were fiddle nights, harvest games, even a wedding or two. And always, somewhere in the crowd, was Temperance with her slate, and Nathaniel close behind, arms crossed, watching like a silent sentinel. On a warm April morning, a rider brought a letter. The envelope bore a wax seal. Inside, thick parchment, neat penmanship. To Mr. Nathaniel Cross, word has reached us of your conduct in Perdition Creek. Your actions prevented the further loss of life and ensured the prosecution of corrupt judicial authority. In accordance with federal statute and the recommendation of Deputy Marshal Heath, we hereby extend to you an invitation to serve as the appointed marshal for the Mountain Territories. The position comes with full authority, a monthly stipend, and the respect of the United States government. Yours in justice, Governor Elias B. Holt, Denver Territory. Nathaniel read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and slid it back into the envelope. He didn't say anything. He walked out to the porch, sat down in his rocking chair, and stared off toward the hills. Temperance joined him after a while, sitting cross-legged beside his boots, braiding a daisy chain in her lap. She glanced at the letter in his hand. "You gonna say yes?" He didn't answer right away. The breeze smelled like lilac and pine. A hawk circled above the ridge. "Finally," he said. "I ain't sure yet." She nodded. The sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the town he'd once planned to ride away from. A town that had buried its fear and was learning to stand on its own. A town that might still need a marshal. The hills behind Perdition Creek glowed amber as dawn rolled slow and warm across the valley. A rooster crowed somewhere in the distance, but Nathaniel Cross had already been awake for hours. He sat on the porch of the schoolhouse, knife in hand, gently carving the curve of a wooden horse's neck. His fingers were careful, his grip steady. Each stroke brought the shape closer to life, the soft pine turning into something a child could ride and believe in. Inside, the clatter of chalk and the hush of morning lessons had yet to begin. But the windows were open and laughter already spilled out. Children ran between rows of sunflowers, chasing each other with the kind of joy that only lives in places where fear no longer has a home. Nathaniel listened, the corners of his mouth lifting just enough to count as a smile. Behind him, the door creaked open. Temperance stepped out, arms crossed over her chest, a ribbon dangling from one wrist. She was taller now. Not much, but enough. Her hair had grown long again, the way her mother used to wear it, and the scar on her shoulder had faded into something faint and strong. "You've been out here since before the sun," she said. "Old habits." "You thinking about the letter again?" He didn't answer right away, just whittled another sliver off the pine. "I said yes yesterday," he said quietly. "Told the courier to ride back to Denver. I'll take the badge." Temperance nodded, unsurprised. "You're not afraid anymore," she said. Nathaniel set the carving down on the railing, stared out at the town below. Shops opening, laundry flapping in the breeze, folks tipping their hats as they passed one another like neighbors instead of prisoners of silence. "I'm still afraid," he said, "but I got more reason to stand still than to keep running." He looked at her. "You gave me that." Temperance blinked fast and sat beside him. "Mama would have liked this town." "The way it is now," he nodded. "She helped make it right." "You too." They sat for a while, not needing more words. The town bell rang once, then twice. Nathaniel stood, stretched the stiffness from his shoulders. He slid the toy horse into his satchel and buckled the flap. On his hip, a new star-shaped badge gleamed in the morning sun. Marshal of the Mountain Territories. It wasn't a title he ever wanted, but it was one he'd earned, not through gunfire or blood, but by staying, by listening, by becoming the kind of man a little girl could trust to hold her hand through hell and walk her back out again. Later that afternoon, he rode the boundary line of town, nodding to the blacksmith, pausing to check the water pump near the church, tipping his hat to the preacher's wife who now taught Sunday letters in place of sermons. At dusk, a wagon rolled in from the East New Settlers, dust-covered and wary. Nathaniel greeted them himself, showed them where they could pitch a tent, and pointed toward the schoolhouse with a quiet promise. Here, children were safe. Here, no girl would ever be sold like livestock again. As the stars came out, Nathaniel stood beneath the old oak tree in front of the courthouse, now the town hall, school, and heart of Perdition Creek. The sky stretched wide and endless overhead. He exhaled. The West still had ghosts, still had men like Ashburn hiding behind money and power, but now it had people willing to stand up. It had fathers who had once failed, but now chose to stay. He looked up at the schoolhouse window where Temperance's lantern flickered softly, then out toward the hills beyond town. Somewhere out there, another child might be waiting for someone to speak up, to come for them, and if they did, they'd find Nathaniel Cross waiting, not as a ghost, but as a father, as a marshal, as the man who stayed. The end for now. If this story stirred something in you, there's more to come. The West is wide, and justice still rides on quiet boots and strong hearts. Make sure to subscribe to Western Legacy so you don't miss what's coming next. More stories of grit, healing, and the families we find when the world gives up on us. Sunsets fade, but legacy rides on.